Welcome back to Poets Debunked with Nicole DeTorres and Isabel Durnan, myself. As you guys know, we choose one question from the comments in the previous episode to focus on. Here's a comment from Shakespeare 1025. Can you guys explain Langston Hughes and some of his poems? Well, of course we can. Nicole, you took a class in high school focused on him, right?
Yes, I did.
Great. So, can you talk about his background a bit?
Well, as an American poet, novelist, and playwright, Langston Hughes was born on February 1st, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. He created African American themes that made him a huge part in history during the Harlem Renaissance. Would you like to talk a little about some of his important experiences in life?
Sure. Hughes graduated from high school in 1920 and spent the following year in Mexico with his father. Around this time, Hughes' poem The Negro Speaks of Rivers was published in the Crisis magazine and was highly praised.
Thank you. Now let's get right to it. Here is Hughes' poem The Negro Speaks of Rivers, along with an introduction of Langston Hughes himself.
This is The Negro Speaks of Rivers, one of my earliest poems, written in 1920, just after I came out of high school. The way this poem came to be written was that I was going to Mexico to visit my father, who lived in Mexico City, and on the train going across the Mississippi River, just outside St. Louis, I looked out the window and I saw this great muddy river flowing down toward the heart of the South. And I began to think about what this river meant to the Negro people, how, in a sense, our history was linked to this river, how in slavery time my grandmother told me that to be sold down the Mississippi was one of the worst things that could happen to a Negro slave. And then I remembered that I'd read about Abraham Lincoln going down the Mississippi as a young man, and he went on a raft to New Orleans, and he saw human beings bought and sold in the slave market there, and he was so horrified by this that he never forgot it. And many years later, of course, we know that it was Lincoln who signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And so, as the train went on into the gathering dusk, because it had been about sunset when we crossed the river, I took my father's letter out of my pocket and began to write down on the back of his letter this poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
Wow, that is very influential. I can see how this could have affected society during those times.
I know, the poem seems to mention the word rivers multiple times. I feel like this could represent time, history, or the past. In line 2 and 3, he says, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. This really helps him to describe the length of time he has seen and experienced by using the blood rushing through the veins.
Don't forget about the figurative language. As you mentioned, the rivers could definitely stand as a form of figurative language. I noticed this poem also includes similes and metaphors. In lines 9 and 10, he says, I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. This line is definitely a metaphor.
Yeah, he doesn't really mean the bottom turned gold.
I think when the poem says muddy, he is describing the color of the person rather than the cleanliness of his bottom, and the sunset helps to make his color look radiant and not so outwardly, such as from Genius.com.
I feel like his words are shown in a deep meaning, which somewhat gives his poem a tone of improvement, curiosity, and comprehension.
I feel as though Langston Hughes' main point or message to the audience is that sometimes sadness can lead into putting yourself through the past and history of experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree. This was during the time when segregation was a big part of daily life. A few years later, after he published this poem, he returned to the U.S. and worked various jobs. He even got to meet American poet Vachel Lindsay while working as a busboy in Washington, D.C.
That's very fascinating. Meeting that poet may have played a large role in influencing him, which in turn influenced all of America.
Yeah, I think he was influenced by Vachel because a few years later, his poem The Weary Blues was published.
What does that have to do with his poem?
Well, most of Vachel's poems dealt with the contemporary controversy of the time, just like in The Weary Blues.
Why don't we listen to Langston Hughes' poem, The Weary Blues, then?
Okay.
Just keep in mind, this is from a news report.
Good evening. Tonight, Mr. Langston Hughes, American poet, dramatist, novelist, lyricist, lecturer. He's in town to give a lecture at UBC, but he's here tonight to read poetry, his own poetry, to a jazz accompaniment. We have Alan Miller to interview him. We have Doug Parker and his band to provide the jazz, and Mr. Langston Hughes has his own accompaniment, his own introduction.
Sun's a-settin'. This is what I'm gonna sing. Sun's a-settin'. This is what I'm gonna sing. I feel the blues a-comin'. I wonder what the blues will bring. In a drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play. Down on Lenox Avenue the other night, by the pale, dull pallor of a one-bulb light, he did a lazy sway. He did a lazy sway to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues. Swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sad, raggy tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues. Deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro sing, that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in all this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I was going to quit my frowning and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, 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 when he's put on the floor. He played a few chords, then he sang some more. I got the weary blues, I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues, I can't be satisfied. I ain't happy no more, and I wish that I had died. Far into the night he crooned that tune. The stars went out, and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed, while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock, or a man that's dead.
Can I start off by saying that jazz music was beautiful?
I agree. It definitely opened up your imagination to the time.
Definitely. Now let's talk about some of the figurative language.
There is some strong figurative language in this poem. Like on line 23, he mentions thump, thump, thump went his foot on the floor. This line shows figurative language as the thumping sound.
That's right. It's a great example of an onomatopoeia. I also want to talk about the tone. It seems very helpless and gloomy.
Yes, it does. Also, a great example of imagery would be when he says, with his ebony hands on each ivory key. It gives the reader something to imagine, kind of like a way to enter the street during the 1920s. Lastly, I noticed there's also quite a few symbols in this poem. Isabel, do you mind talking about them?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I can start off with the title itself. The title, The Weary Blues, represents sadness, loneliness, and depression.
Uh-huh.
The stars and the moon could also be a symbol of death, or happiness or hope.
So why do you think that? Like, why do you feel like the stars and moon could represent something... represent something positive or something negative?
Well, this could represent death because the stars and the moon seem to disappear, and also it's like night, and when you think of night, you think of like nothing. The end of everything.
You also mentioned it as a symbol of happiness and hope.
Yep. So this could mean that the light is leading a path to a happier future. This has been an episode of Poets Debunked with Nicole DeTorres and Isabel Durnan, myself. As you know, we always check out the comments below, so leave a comment for our next podcast, and I can't wait to hear from you guys next time.
Bye!